Hi, this is National Master Dan Heisman, and we're here to help you improve your chess game. If you haven't told your friends about my chess channel, Dan Heisman Chess, please do that. That would greatly help things. Make a point next time you go to the club or next time you're talking to a friend online, send them a link. Anyway, today I'd like to talk about an evening I had at the Mainline Chess Club many years ago. There was a player who was a regular player at the club, but he was handicapped, and at some point he decided he wasn't going to be able to come to the club anymore. So at the start of the evening, on his last day there, he said to me, "Dan, I've always wanted to play you, and we haven't had a chance to play, and this is probably going to be my last night at the club. Would you mind playing me some games?" And he said, "I don't want to play with the clock, and you can have white in every game, but let's just play some games and see what happens." Well, based on the information that he just gave me, I couldn't say no, even though I normally play games with a clock. So we sat down and we played some games, and I thought I'd go over each of the 5 games really quickly in today's video to kind of show you what happens when a master plays like an 1100 player, because a lot of people say to me, "Oh, I played a weak opponent, but I didn't know how to take advantage of their mistakes," or I thought their moves were perfectly reasonable. So let's take a look at what happens when a strong player plays a weaker player. Let's take a look at the games. Here we go. First game, in each game I think I played e4. Let's click on the moves. e4. He plays Sicilian. I go for open Sicilian. He plays knight c6. I'm perfectly happy to play book lines. Computer's showing me these shadows. Let's see if I can turn off the shadows. Maybe not. So d4. And now he has to take the pawn, because basically I have a positional threat to play d5. Instead he plays e6, but that's actually a known mistake, because now if I play d5, his knight doesn't have any great places to go. So this is a case where I have chess knowledge. His knowledge doesn't tell him that he has to take the pawn, and my knowledge is that if I play d5 here, I'm almost already winning. So I play d5, he takes, I take, and now he realizes that going to all the safe squares is actually fairly bad, so he decides to give me a pawn. But if you give me an important central pawn, that's pretty much losing the game already. So already I'm winning here, and the engine says he has nothing better. It says his move knight d4 is actually his best move, even though it doesn't look good. So of course I win the pawn. Knight takes, pawn takes, queen takes. He develops his knight. I get my bishop out, getting ready to castle. He plays the slow move b6. Well, that's a mistake, because now I can stop his bishop on f8 from coming out, and I could play d6, threatening a move like queen e5 check. So I play d6, and now he has no move with the queen, because the pawn on b6 blocks his queen. He can't get his queen out, and I'm threatening to check on the e file, winning a piece. So he realizes he's losing a piece, so he just gives it to me. Probably if you're playing someone who's weak, and you think you're losing a piece, make them win it. Don't just give it to them. So he takes the pawn. I take back, but now he can't castle. He develops the bishop. I castle to guard my g-pawn. He brings his bishop out. I check him. He plays bishop e6. Now his dark squares are weak. I play b3, threatening to play bishop a3. The only move he really can play here is queen to e7 to stop that. He doesn't do it. He plays rook c8. And now I play bishop to b5 just to stop his rook from hitting my queen on c6 so that I can play bishop a6. He takes the pawn. I said, "You're welcome to have the pawn." I will play bishop to a3. Now, in some lines, I'm threatening rook takes e6 check, f takes e6, queen takes e6 check, sneaky pin, and his only legal move is queen e7 and then queen takes e7 mate. There's really no defense against that. Engine says he should play rook c5 and give up the rook to stop that. He plays queen c7, and of course I can mate him on e7. All right, let's go to the second game. All right, here's the second game. Again, I'm playing e4 in each game. This time he decides, well, my knight c6 didn't work. Let me play the hyper-accelerated fianchetto. I played open Sicilian. He takes. This time I decide to play the queen takes line. Not because it's better than the knight takes line. It's just a little more tricky, and let's see what he knows about this. He plays f6, which is not the best move, but it is a move. I played bishop c4, putting my bishop on that weak light squared diagonal. He fianchettos the bishop. I just castled. Notice all I'm doing here is I'm just getting my pieces out as fast as I can. He plays knight h6. I play knight c3. Now I have 5 pieces out. I have the 4 pieces out plus I'm castled. So that's 5, and he only has 2. When you're ahead 5-2 and how many pieces are out, and he can't castle, that's a big advantage. All right, so he attacks my queen. And I put my queen on the diagonal, trying to kind of entice him to play e6 so I can go on that dark square diagonal again. He does play e6. I play queen d3. He plays knight f7. I develop my next bishop to bishop f4. He plays h6. That's way too slow. So I play knight b5, threatening knight c7 check, forking the king and the rook. If he castles here, I can still win some material, I think. Yeah, the engine says castle. No, then bishop c7 hitting the queen, queen e8, a4, plus 2.5. So he plays e5 to block my bishop. I just come back. Stockfish has me up by about 6 pawns here because of my big lead in development. He plays d6. I go after his weak g6 square with knight h4. There's really no way for him to guard that square, and if he pushes the pawn, I can go right into the light squares. He pushes the pawn. I do a little Zwischenzug. I threaten to take the knight first, so he has to bring out a piece. He brings the queen to d7. He doesn't want to go to e7 because knight g6 will fork his rook and his queen. So now that his bishop is not guarding the f5 square, I can play knight to f5, hitting his bishop. Now he gets a chance to castle, but now I have too many pieces on his d6 square, so I win the pawn. He attacks my queen. I just go back. He takes the pawn, thinking he's going to overwork my knight on my queen guarding my knight on d6, but he forgot that his knight on f7 is pinned. So that when I take his queen, he can't take my knight on d6 because of the pin, and he ends up just losing a piece. So he resigns. All right, third game. All right, again I play e4. He plays g6. I play d4, grabbing the center. He's trying different openings just to see what he can do in terms of getting out of the opening. Bishop g7, knight c3. And now he should try to castle. This is the modern defense. He could play c5. He could play d6. He plays b6 a little bit slow. I play bishop c4. He plays bishop b7. I just keep developing, knight f3. And now he plays e6. Not a bad move. He could play knight e7 and then castle. I play bishop g5. Here he should probably just play knight ge7 and castle. He plays f6. I go back to f4. He plays h6. Now notice he's done that in a couple games. He's played this move h6. But he doesn't need to play h6 to guard g5. He already played f6 to guard g5. And what he does in both these games is he greatly weakens that g6 square. And it's going to be tough for him to guard that square. So I play queen d3, threatening to play e5 with a discovered attack on g6. He plays d6, so now he's playing almost like a hippopotamus. He's got all his pawns on the 6th rank there. The problem is he just unguarded his e-pawn, and I say to myself, what are all the things that move d6 does? One of the things that move d6 does is it unguards his e-pawn. Can I just take it for free? You bet. So I take it. He attacks my bishop, and now I play a little trick that I've learned. This is knowledge again. Knight d5, hitting the queen. Now, he has several moves. He could take the bishop, queen takes e6, but then knight c7 check wins his queen. He could take my knight, but then I win the bishop pair, and after I play pawn takes, I have a pawn guarding my bishop on e6, and it's going to be really difficult for him to get that bishop out of there, but that's the best he should do. He should take the knight. Engine has me up by 8 pawns already. Also, if he takes the knight and I take back, my queen would be attacking g6, so he decides to just move his queen back. And now his g6 square is really in trouble. I play e5 with a discovered attack on g6. He takes the pawn, and I take check. And it's going to be mate on the next move. His only legal move is king to f8, and I have queen f7 checkmate. So again, big lead in development. He weakens a couple squares. I have more pieces out. I've got 5 pieces around his king. He only has 2 pieces out. Lead in development, weak squares, equal win here. All right, game 4. I play e4. He says, let me go back to playing Sicilian again. His original choice. I said, okay, let's go back, open Sicilian. He plays knight c6. I play open Sicilian. He plays pawn takes. I play knight takes. So now he's supposed to play something like knight f6. He could also play e6. He could also play e5. But knight f6 and e6 are the 2 most common lines. g6 with a version of the accelerated fianchetto, Sicilian accelerated fianchetto dragon, is also possible. If he plays g6, I'm supposed to play c4. So he has all those moves, and he makes a common beginner mistake. He trades against the higher-rated player, and he says, let me bring your queen to the middle of the board. But when you bring someone's queen to the middle of the board, if you don't have like a knight or a minor piece or an easy thing to attack it with, then the queen's actually very, very strong here. So knight takes d4, as you can see in the engine's analysis, is not one of the top moves here. Right now, the engine says black is pretty much even on the black side of a Sicilian at depth 49 with moves like queen c7 or e6 or knight f6. After he plays knight takes, queen takes, you can see the engine now has me up by 0.8. So let's show you the difference. Let's say instead I had played a Mora Gambit, or not a Mora Gambit, let's say I played d4. And instead of playing the Mora Gambit, let's say I had played queen takes d4. Well, that's just bad because he can play knight c6, which is an AWL move. If you haven't watched my video on AWL, you could search on my channel for AWL, attack with something worth less. But AWL is a very important concept, and it's a good one to know. And if you AWL someone in the opening, and it takes a piece that goes from a square where it's not doing much to a square where it wants to go, and you're attacking a piece that is on a good square that has to go off to maybe another good square, so that he has to waste a tempo moving the piece, then that kind of AWL in the opening is called winning a tempo. Winning a tempo is a very common term. AWL is not, but I think AWL should actually be a very common term too. So this would be bad for white, but look at the difference between that and the game. In the game, in order to get my queen in the middle, he has to trade off that knight that would normally attack the queen, and that doesn't cause me any problems. All right, so he plays e6. I develop again with knight c3. Here comes that h6 move again. That's the kind of move that loses games. People are like, oh, I'm afraid you're going to put your bishop on g5 later, so I played my pawn to h6 to stop it. No, if you play h6, I'll just put my bishop somewhere else, and I'm using that tempo to develop the piece, and you're using that tempo just to prevent me from putting on a square where I could go somewhere else that's just as good. And you just don't do that in chess because it's a really big waste of time, but I see this kind of error all the time. So I say, all right, I'm going to play bishop to f4, and I'm going to go after that weak d6 square. He plays a6, keeping my knight out of b5. Well, that makes a little more sense than h6. He probably could have played maybe even d6 threatening e5. So I, of course, castle queenside, and now I'm getting ready to maybe even stick my bishop into d6, or I'll just develop my king bishop and play on the squares. He develops his knight to e7. That actually makes some sense because now he can play knight c6, put the knight on a good square and make my queen move, but it's going to cost him 2 knight moves to do that and not just one. So I develop my bishop c4. He attacks my queen, and I just go back to e3. And at this point it looks like he's going to last longer than he did in the other games. If he just simply plays something like maybe bishop e7 and castle kingside, I might even play bishop takes h6. We'd have to see what happens on my next move. But instead, he plays e5. Well, there you go. He just moved something twice in the opening. He moved his e-pawn. He's attacking my bishop, but my bishop can easily move. He's not winning this is not winning a tempo. Moving a piece twice and costing yourself a tempo to attack a piece that has to move. That a lot of my students say, oh, I'm winning a tempo by playing e5. No, you're not. cost you a tempo. It'll cost me a tempo to save the bishop. That's neutral. You're not winning any tempos by doing moves like that. So, of course, I'm just going to play bishop g3. But now his d5 and d6 squares have become very weak. And my knight has a really nice place to hold out for the middle game on knight d5. So he plays f6. That guards the e5 square so he can move the knight on c6. But he doesn't want to move the knight on c6. And it opens that diagonal, so my bishop on c4 is guarding g8, which means even if he does develop the bishop on f8, he can't castle anymore. So all of a sudden, he's going to be losing the game. If we go back before those two moves, in this position, the engine has me, because of my superior development, I've got 5 pieces out again, and my opponent only has 1. I'm ahead by 2.0. Once he plays here and weakens the squares, my lead grows to 2.4. And once he weakens some more squares and opens up his king, now my lead jumps up to 6.2. And the engine says I should play the break move f4 and open the f file for my king rook to come over and participate in the attack. Instead, I just move my queen back to attack the late squares. Now I'm threatening queen h5 check. He pretty much would have to play a move like h5. He could play g6, but we've already seen how weak playing all those pawns up one when you haven't castled, even when you have castled, is. So he plays knight to d4. And I'm like, I wonder if I can just take that knight and then check him and then maybe mate him. So I did a little calculation and I said, well, it's probably more accurate to check first. So I checked first, and he played king e7, and I played rook takes d4. And now he can't take back, because if he plays e takes d4, my bishop on g3 is guarding the d6 square, and then queen f7 will be mate, which means he has to do something else. And right now I'm threatening mate with queen f7 anyway, because the rook's guarding that square. So he'd have to make a move like moving his queen, and the engine has me up by about 11 pawns. But instead, he pretty quickly just makes the, quote, automatic recapture. And I'm really not... When I make a move like rook takes d4, if you miss moves like this, it's a quiescence error. If you say rooks are worth more than knights, I can't take off that knight, well, you're not really looking at what the pieces are doing, because I'm not risking anything by playing rook takes d4. I've already calculated that if I can guard that d6 square with the bishop on g3 or my rook on d4, then I'm going to have a checkmate with queen f7. So I play rook d4, and now as the engine says, he has to move his queen and just give up that knight. He does the automatic recapture, and I say, all right, I know this pattern. Queen f7 is checkmate because your king can't run to d6. So again, I sacked the exchange, but it wasn't. It's when you're sacking something and you're going to get it all back and more, no matter what your opponent does. We call that a pseudo sack, or something similar to pseudo, kind of a fake sacrifice, sham sacrifice. So some people call it a sham sack, some people call it a pseudo sack. I like pseudo sack, but I think sham sack is more common. In fact, I wonder if I have sham sack on my definition page on my website. I think I'll check my definitions and see if I have sham sack and pseudo sack. All right, back to our video here. Last game, I play e4. He says, well, let's play Sicilian again. He's trying to learn from his previous mistakes. I play knight f3, he plays knight c6, I play d4, he takes, I take. And now if he learned from his previous mistake, he would not take my knight, but unfortunately for him he does. I take with the queen again. He plays e6. All right, so here we go, same kind of thing. I'm going to get my pieces out. I play knight c3. He plays b6, getting ready to fianchetto the queen bishop, but he really wants to get his... Notice in none of these games, except maybe that one game where he castled too late, in none of these games has he castled early and really just gotten his pieces out on the king side to castle. Notice how he's creating these weak squares here. The d6 is a weak square, a6 is a weak square. Maybe if he makes some more pawn moves, some more squares will be weak. So I played bishop f4, again going after these weak dark squares here in the diagonal. He now, again, he likes to move his rook pawns. He plays a6. Keeping my knight out of b5, I guess he's worried about these threats, and that's understandable, but now he's also weakened the b6 square, and he's spent more time. What do I do when my opponent spends more time? I get another piece in the game. I get my rook on the open d file. Now I have a queen out, a bishop out, a knight out, and a rook on this semi-open d file, and my opponent has 0 pieces out. Well, that's recipe for disaster. If you look at what happens if black plays his best move now, which is b5, the engine says I'm already up by 2.0. How much does it take to win a game? Pretty much anything over 1.0 is probably winning if I play perfectly, which of course I can't do. So here it says already I'm probably winning. So he plays bishop b7, and the engine says if I find knight to a4, hitting that pawn on b6, and then if he plays b5, I can play knight b6. It says I'm trapping the rook because he can't play rook b8. Rook a7 goes into a discovered attack. So it says knight a4 wins material. So bad for me here. I decide I'm just going to keep developing my pieces, but actually I already have a win with knight to a4, which I almost undoubtedly didn't see. But again, we're not playing a slow game with a clock. We're playing without a clock, which means we can play as slow as we want. But, based on what my friend has asked me to do, I'm not playing, super slow, because it's kind of against what he's trying to do, which is play me a bunch of, reasonably paced games. So I'm playing slow, but I'm not playing as slow as I would like in a, 40 game moves in 2-hour game. So again, he plays h6. There's that waste of time with the pawn, letting me bring pieces out. Which piece is doing nothing? The rook on h1 is doing nothing when you don't have any big tactics or anything special to do. You find your worst piece and make it better. Move every piece once before you move any piece twice in the opening, unless there's a tactic. We saw me moving pieces twice in the other games because I had tactics, but here I don't, so I just developed the rook. And now I have some ideas of maybe sacking a piece on d5 so I can get into his side of the board. He plays knight e7. And the engine says, I now found the best move. Wow, Dan, way to go. I play a move which I'm sure most amateurs wouldn't play, but it's actually the best move. I didn't know it at the time, but I thought it was cute. I played bishop to d5. Again, putting my piece where he could just take it with a pawn, but if he takes it with the pawn and I take back, I'm pinning his knight to his king and I'm threatening d6. And if he plays d6, I've got all kinds of monstrous threats against his position. So I calculated that if he takes my bishop with his pawn, that I'm doing well. And in fact, the engine says that taking the bishop with the pawn is not even one of the 3 best moves here for black, even though a lot of humans would just snap that bishop off right away. So he attacks my queen instead. I said, all right, I will not lose a tempo. I will take it. And when he takes back, again I play the best move. And again it's to put a piece on d5 where it's attacked by a pawn. And it's to play knight there. So it's the second time I put a piece on d5 in the same game that he could just take with a pawn. Well, now if he takes with a pawn and I take back with my pawn discovered check, I'm not only getting that check where I could get my piece back by taking his bishop on c6, but I could also play d6 and get my piece back on e7. So this is, again, a pseudo-sacrifice if he takes it. He decides to take it this time. I take back. He goes there. Now I have a choice. Do I want to take the bishop on c6, or do I want to play d6 and take the bishop on e7? If I play d6 and he castles, then I can play d takes e7, forking the queen and the rook with a pawn, which means he can't castle, which means he's in big trouble. So I could play d6, but I actually have a third candidate move here. Queen takes g7, threatening to take the rook with mate because the bishop on e7 is pinned. And it turns out, when you see a good move, look for better ones. So d takes c6 is a good move, d6 is a better move, but queen takes g7 threatening checkmate is the best move of all. So that's what I did. I played queen takes g7. Good for you, Dan. You found the right idea. And now he needs to find a way to get out of it. He plays rook to f8, so I can't take his rook. And I just play bishop takes h6. And now, because of the sneaky pin on f8, I'm threatening queen takes f8 checkmate. And the only defense he really has is to push his pawn on d6. But if he pushes the pawn on d6, I can take the bishop on c6, blocking his king's escape square, and then I'm going to mate him anyway. So let's show that line if you can't visualize it. d6, d takes c6, and now I'm threatening the sneaky pin, queen takes f8 checkmate. And he has no defense. He can't move the king. He can't move the bishop. If he moves the queen, it has no effect. He can't castle. So no matter what he does on the next move, it's checkmate. So after I played bishop h6, my opponent played bishop takes d5, hoping to get his bishop into e6 so he could do something. Now I could play rook takes d5, but of course then he could play d6 and stop the mate, but I have mate in 1. Queen takes f8, sneaky pin mate. Alright, so this was Chess Master versus Chess Amateur. I think when I did the Novice Nook to show these games, they changed the name because they didn't want me to have the same name as the famous book. But I was actually doing an homage to Max Euwe, who wrote the book Chess Master versus Chess Amateur. It's a really great book, and that's basically what's happening in these games too. So that's my homage to that great book, Chess Master versus Chess Amateur. Okay, hope you enjoyed something. Hope you saw some of the things that my opponent was doing that maybe you'll stop doing in your games. Hopefully you saw some of the things that I was doing, which is just get piece out after piece out after piece out and have more pieces out than he does in every game. If you do those kind of things when you're playing weak players, you can often beat them relatively quickly. If you make the same mistakes they do and you say they're going to play h6, so I'll play h3, well, then you're not going to get the kind of lead in development that I had in these games. Hopefully that'll be helpful for you in the future. Again, please tell your friends about my channel. If you haven't subscribed, you can do that. You can like the video, and I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.